Hey guys, I'm about to read a story by Gh0stW0rd on Archive of Our Own. It's called Gospel of the Brokenhearted. I, for one, fucking love this person's stories. I was lucky enough to talk to them, and we're getting to know each other, and we're pretty good friends right now, and I had to share this with you guys. It's Minetta X Reader, and yeah, without further ado, I'm just gonna read it. Yeah. Gospel of the Brokenhearted. Summary. The reader sneaks into Minetta's dorm, drunk, in the middle of the night, and makes him an explicit offer. Oh shit. Minetta was almost asleep in his bed. He was at the point where the world felt distant, but not enough that it was no longer there. It was a peaceful state to be in, dead to the world, but not dead yet. His foggy cloud of vision was disturbed as he heard something. His brows furrowed, but his eyes remained closed. He was so close to falling asleep. What woke him up? He waited in case he heard it again. Ow, fuck! A mumbled voice came from outside his window. Minetta cracked open his eyes. He pushed himself up to sit upright. He looked behind himself at his window. Was someone on his balcony? There was scuffling going on outside until his window slid open. A body covered in shadow came tumbling in and hit his computer desk with a thud. Minetta was wide awake now. He stood up on his bed to make himself taller as he raised his hands to his head, ready to use his quirk. "Who are you?" he demanded as he forced his voice to steady. The person didn't acknowledge him. They only held their head as they flopped onto their side. Oh, fuck, that hurt. A familiar voice spoke to itself. Minetta looked closer to the form. He got a little light from the moon outside to make out a face. "Your last name." Minetta looked baffled as he lowered his arms. It was his classmate that broke into his room in the middle of the night. She pushed herself off the ground and used his computer desk to support herself. She shook her head and then nodded it in his direction with a sloppy grin adorning his face. Whew. "Fancy meeting you here, Minetta," she said in jest. Minetta took in her appearance. She wore a Letterman jacket of her favorite color, a black t-shirt and boots, and dark blue jeans. Her clothes were dirty and disheveled. Probably pronounced that wrong. Stay with me here. I'm not perfect. Did she roll around in the dirt before climbing up here? Maybe she did. Maybe that's her hobby. All jokes. What are you doing in my... What are you doing in my room? Minetta got straight to the point. What? Can I come see my favorite classmate? She shrugged and almost fell, but she righted herself. I'm your favorite? He stuttered out and pointed to himself. Minetta's face lit up like a Christmas tree with how red he got. He almost cried out of happiness that he was a girl's favorite. Yeah. She went to walk to him but tripped over herself and landed on the floor. Clumsy bitch. Are you okay? Minetta said in surprise, but still trying to keep his voice down. He hopped down onto the floor with her to make sure she's okay. She pushed herself up once more, to her knees this time. Like this, it created the illusion that he was taller than her. He stood stock still while she looked up at him with a wonky grin. Her eyes were half-lidded, but he could still see a splash of color in the dim light. He thought she was so pretty, even covered in dirt. She squinted at his face for a second as she tilted her head. Minetta panicked a bit. Did he have something on his face? Was his hair messy? Did he drool on himself? She cupped his face and made him flinch slightly. Ooh, you got a bit of stubble there, she cooed. He blushed even more as her hands caressed his cheeks. He usually shaves in the morning to keep a clean look. It always grows in kind of patchy, so this is the first time she's seen him with facial hair. I like it, she drunkenly grinned at him. He could smell the alcohol on her breath. Minetta finally put the pieces together. Scratchy, smooth, she whispered giddily as she rubbed up and down on his face. Are you drunk? He asked as he furrowed his eyebrows with worry. She let go of his face and sat down. Sure am, she said without a hint of shame. She leaned back on her hands as she smiled up at him. How did you get alcohol? He questioned her. Minetta was having a bit of trouble taking in the situation. Snuck out and asked the guy to go in the liquor store and buy me a bottle of wine. Gave him an extra 2,000 yen, she explained nonchalantly as she pulled a boot off. And I drank the whole bottle, she said as she removed her other boot. Minetta's face must have read pure confusion because she then added, and then I came to pay you a visit. She winked up at him. Why? He gulped. She got up on her knees again. She looked him in his charcoal eyes that shifted sheepishly over her features. She shrugged off her jacket slowly without breaking eye contact with him. She saw him puffing out hot air through his nostrils at the sight of her disrobing. It gave her a confidence boost as she reached for the hem of her shirt and, just as slowly, stripped it off her body. With every new inch of skin being revealed, Minetta's nose started to bleed and his body quivered. She smirked at the sight. I think you could guess why I'm here, she said coyly as she showed off her bra to him. Minetta was trembling like a newborn deer at this point. His arms were stiff at his side, while his eyes were trained on her breasts. By the way, I got condoms too while I was out. She pulled out a long pack of condoms from her pocket. Her intentions are made perfectly clear to him now. Is this really happening? Minetta inquired through a shaky voice. She wrapped her arms around his neck and nodded. She leaned in so her mouth was next to his ear. I'll let you do whatever you want to me, she whispered in his ear and punctured her sentence with a light nip at it. Then sent a That sent a shiver up his spine. His hands flexed, but remained at his sides. And I do mean whatever you want, she said in a low and sensual tone. Minetta's nose was like a faucet at this point. She hugged him so he could feel her breast on his chest. I just want to forget, she added under her breath. Minetta stopped at that. The blood stopped gushing and his body stopped shaking. He was deathly still for a few heartbeats, and so was she. He glanced to the side, but he couldn't see her face. Want to forget? He repeated, barely above a whisper. His brows furrowed and concerned at her silence. She didn't answer. Instead, she picked him up and laid herself on her back in the bed with him on top of her. Minetta was laying chest to chest with her, so he pushed himself upright to sit on her hips. His heart was racing at the sight before him. One of the prettiest girls in class is laying shirtless in his bed. He must be dreaming. He used the back of his hand to wipe the blood off of his face. As he was distracted, her hands made their way under his shirt in an attempt to arouse him. His skin flinched from the feeling of foreign hands touching him. His mind was still reeling from everything that's happening right now. He reviewed the information in his head. She called him her favorite, even though they don't talk a lot. She's drunk. She wants to forget about something. She came to him to have sex. She's also drunk. This seems scummy. He took a sharp breath. Her hands moving lower on his body brought his thoughts back to the present. Her hands went up the legs of his shorts and stroked his inner thighs. His body started trembling again at the stimulation. He shut his eyes tightly and let his head fall back slightly. He wanted her to touch him just a little higher. She must have picked up on that because her hands started to slide more into his shorts. His hips were twitching with anticipation. She could feel his muscles tensing more the further she went. with her hands all the way in his shorts. She was so close to where he wanted her to be. He suddenly grabbed her hands by the wrists and pulled them out. He took a few breaths to ground himself. He put both her wrists in one hand, and he pulled a ball off his head and stuck her wrists together. She didn't fight him as he did it. He leaned her arms above her head until his quirk stuck to the bed. He leaned back to see her arms restrained and that she still had that sloppy smirk on her lips. He was sat back on her hips and just stared at her while he tried to even his breathing. She waited patiently for him to get his bearings, but when he made no move to touch her, she spoke up. "So, is this the type of teasing you're into?" She raised an eyebrow and shifted her hips. He said nothing, only shook his head side to side. Her smile fell at that answer. She bucked her hips up to gain a response from him. She didn't get one. "Come on," she groaned in frustration. "I thought you'd jump at the chance that a girl wants you to touch her." She practically snarled out. She braced her feet on the bed and lifted her body up to get him to move. He was stubbornly situated on her, so she just dropped her body onto the bed. "You're the class perv, right? So act like it," she said in frustration as she struggled with her bondage. "Honestly, any other night, I would." He looked her in the eyes, her intoxicated, bleary eyes. "But you're drunk. You don't really want me. You're just looking for a distraction from whatever it is you want to think about." He crossed his arms as he stated his conclusion. "What does it matter to you?" she spat out. "I'm here and I'm willing, so go for it," she told him her drunken logic. His eyes oh my god, big words. I'm dumb. I'm not even gonna try. Taking her state, he watched her chest expand with each breath. Her breasts looked so plump and ready for him to squeeze. Jesus, Minetta. He bet they'd feel so soft in his hands. He snapped out of that thought and looked up at her face. It had a light dusting of dirt, probably from falling over on her way here. His sight traveled higher to her hands. Her forearm has a few scratches on them, and her nail beds looked a little bloody. He locked his gaze with hers once more. She was angry, he could tell, and frustrated and sad. She was trying so hard to cover up her sorrow. "No," his voice was gentle but stern. "This is wrong." He shut his eyes and shook his head. "This was a waste of time," she said out of exasperation and threw her head back on the pillow. He will admit, that kind of hurt. "What are you trying to forget?" Minetta asked carefully as he opened his eyes. "Not like I'd tell you," she spoke with pure venom. She didn't even look his way, just kept her gaze straight towards the ceiling. "Well, it'll take a while for me to unstick you, so you'll have time to change your mind," he said as he leaned over her. Her eyes widened when his chest came directly in her line of sight. Minetta slid his fingers around where the ball stuck to her wrist. He slowly and carefully squeezed his fingers together to get his skin between hers and the ball. As he was doing that, her hazy eyes traveled down to his hips. With his arms raised, it made his shirt ride up. She could see the indents of his pelvis and a little bit of his happy trail. She felt her face heat up at the thought of what is just out of sight. She'd never admit it out loud, but she's had a small crush on Minetta for a while now. She thought he was smart and funny and charming in his own perverted way. She even liked the little lisp he spoke with. Funny enough, despite being a pervert, he was content with whatever was given to him. Paying him a small compliment would make him cry on the spot. It was cute. That's why she came to him tonight. She thought that if she offered herself to him, he'd take her. He'd touch her and feel her up and make her feel good without question. He would make her feel desirable. And yet here she lays, completely at his mercy, and even he doesn't want her. She gritted her teeth and squeezed her eyes shut to prevent the tears she knew were coming. He saw her fists clenching and shaking from the strain. She dug her nails into her palms to cause pain and distract her from her emotions. It failed. "I'm just so tired," she admitted. It got his attention. Minetta gazed at her face that was softly crying. "I'm tired of being alone." She paused to fight back against the tears. "I don't want to sleep by myself anymore. I want someone in my bed." She doesn't want to tell him this personal stuff, but the booze in her system made that difficult. "I want someone to touch me and tell me I'm beautiful without a hint of sarcasm." With every word she divulged, she could feel her own heart breaking. "I want someone who will hold me and kiss me. I want someone to whisper sweet nothings in my ear. I want someone to tell me that they love me." Minetta watched with a flushed face as she sobbed out her deepest desires. "I want someone who will never get tired of making love to me. I want to be loved over and over again." She paused to sniffle before she finished. "I thought if I came to you, you'd..." As she said this all out loud, she realized just how stupid it sounded. She opened her eyes and was met with Minetta's surprised expression. She felt a rush of embarrassment wash over her. She closed her eyes and moved her head away so she can't see him. Did she expect all that from him? No. She said before that she just wanted to forget. She was looking to him to play pretend with. It made sense she'd go for the pervert. It seemed unlikely he'd say no. Guess she didn't see this coming. He looked down at the half-naked girl in his bed. There was a pang of guilt that filled his chest. He only let out a heavy sigh and finished unsticking her wrist from his quirk. Once she was freed, she lowered her arms so that her hands were on either side of her head. Minetta could make out the glistening of her tears in the moonlight. "Minetta," she quietly called his name. He still glanced at her face even though she wasn't looking at him. "Can you be heartbroken without ever being in love?" She posed the question to him. He let the question linger in his mind before answering. "Yeah," he barely got out. "I think you can," he said with a crestfallen expression. There was once more a moment of silence between them. It wasn't uncomfortable, but it wasn't relaxing either. She suddenly grabbed him and wrapped her arms around him in a vice-like grip. He let out a squeak of surprise. She buried her face in his chest and cried into his shirt. His arms were pinned to his side, so there was nothing he could do to comfort her. Instead, he stayed still and let her use him like a stuffed animal. He could feel his shirt getting wet as it soaked up her woe. It took some time before she calmed herself down enough to loosen her grip on him. He slipped his arms out of her hold with her face still covered by his shirt. He was hesitant to touch her, but he settled for patting her on the head. To her, that was a signal to pull away, so she did. "You should get some sleep. You could stay here tonight," he suggested. He didn't want to kick her out in this state. She could barely walk without falling all over herself. She didn't respond, only repositioned herself to have her head on the pillow. Minetta fixed the blanket so it was over them now. They lay on their sides, facing each other. Like this, he could see the puffiness of her eyes. He felt sympathetic towards her in this condition. She was really broken up about her dilemma. Her arms left him and she started shifting under the covers. He didn't know what she was doing until she pulled her jeans out and tossed them. "What are you doing?" he whispered in shock. "I thought we weren't doing that." His eyes were as red as a rose, and his face was as red as a rose, and his eyes were as wide as saucers. "I know, it's just uncomfortable to sleep in jeans," she stated calmly, not even acknowledging his panic. Minetta was left with the knowledge that all she had under his blanket was her underclothes. He did his best to keep his imagination clear. Classic Minetta. He shut his eyes and forced himself to go to sleep. It was obviously very hard, given the circumstances, and it was made even harder by what she said next. "Can you kiss me?" she whispered to him. He opened his eyes and was met with, "Your last names." Soft expression so close to him. When did she get closer? Never mind that. What did she ask? Even in the darkness of his room, he could see her eyes. It looked like she was pleading to him rather than asking him. He wasn't answering, so she got a little closer. She leaned in, but left a gap between them. She was letting him decide. He could still smell the wine on her breath and feel her warmth on her lips. His own breath hitched, and he gulped out of habit. He knows he shouldn't, but at the same time, it felt cruel to deny her. That's what he tells himself, at least. He gave in and kissed her. He might go to hell for this, but that was a risk he was willing to take to put her at ease. With his eyes closed, he could take in much more with his other senses. Her lips were so soft on his, and he could taste the wine that had been the catalyst for their meeting. He swore he could get drunk from this kiss alone. Her natural scent filled his nose with a sweet aroma that made his head feel light. He could hear her quietly moaning into the kiss. The sounds alone were making him fall apart at the seams. He had to remind himself to be good for her. This was all he was going to do, he swore to himself. She held him tightly like he'd disappear if she even just loosened her grip a little bit. He could feel the softness of her chest on his, which he tried not to think about. He wrapped a hand around the back of her neck, and the other he placed on the side of her face. His stubble scratched at her face, but she didn't mind. She liked the prickly texture on her skin. She tilted her head to deepen the kiss. Neither were very skilled when it came to this type of thing, but neither cared anyway. It felt too good for both of them to want to stop. It gave them both butterflies in their stomachs and sent their hearts aflutter. They finally broke apart and were panting now. They locked their gazes with one another, and she felt Minetta's thumb caressing her cheek. Neither dared to interrupt this moment of respite? Oh my god. They shared. They stayed like this for a few minutes until he spoke. Okay. Fuck, hold on. Y'all probably think I'm the dumbest motherfucker in the world. Okay, go to sleep for real this time. Your last name. He adjured. She nodded and laid her head on the pillow. Her mind was still swimming from that kiss. Minetta did the same as he pulled the blanket up a little more and got them both comfortable to get some rest. He felt her place her forehead on his. It was a comforting gesture, one he was happy to receive. I hope y'all like that, and y'all probably think y'all really think I'm probably the dumbest motherfucker. But some of these words I read wrong, but I knew the word, but I was more focused on reading, if that even makes sense. And then other words, I'm gonna be honest, I didn't even know how to pronounce them. That's why I think this person's work is so good. They use so many good words to describe things, and it literally feels like a movie playing in your head. So I had to give this, some clout. So go check her out. She's on Archive of Her Own. Her name is Gh0stW0rd. Gh0stW0rd. Oh my god. Yeah, just check her out. Check her out. And she has this other story called Dionysus. It's a lot longer, but if you like this story, let me know, because I'm thinking of reading the Dionysus, and I'll do it chapter by chapter. It'll be in consecutive videos, and that's something I really want to do for this channel, but I want to make sure you guys will like it. So if you like this, let me know. Hit the like button, comment, and show Gh0stW0rd some love. See ya.